Washback. If the test is high stake as a test whose results are seen as being used to make important decisions, a phenomenon known as washback may occur. Positive washback can encourage learners to learn, but negative washback hinder the learning. Now, explain washback. If the test is high stakes, defined by scholars as a test whose results are seen by students, teachers, administrators, parents, and general public as being used to make important decisions that immediately and directly affect them, a phenomenon known as washback may occur. Washback is the term that is used when students and teachers do things they would not necessarily otherwise do because of the test. They might, for example, pay more attention to certain part of the teaching syllabus at the expense of other parts because they believe these will be emphasized on the test. They might practice certain types of questions rather than others for the same reason. So the washback of a test can either be positive or negative to the extent that it either promotes or hinder the accomplishment of educational goals for the learners. As I said, positive washback encourage learners to learn. Negative washback hinder the learning. Question is this: what is Messick's perspective about washback? Messick claim that washback is a particular instance of the consequential aspect of construct validity, which suggests that investigating washback and other consequences is a crucial step in the process of test validation. Next question: what are two views about washback based on scholars? Scholars argue that tests can be a powerful, low-cost means of influencing the quality of what teachers teach and what students learn at school. And this view is shared by educators like Povum, who proclaims the advantages of measurement-driven instruction, and language educators such as Pearson, who used the term lever for change. Opponents to this view include, for example, scholars like Maddus, who claimed that using high-stakes tests to effect change leads to teaching to test, and the use of past test papers as teaching material, and that it transfers control over curriculum to the agency which sets or controls the exam. Question is this: explain and name effects of washback. The idea of washback takes on more complexity when we consider not only whether the effects of tests are positive or negative, but also whether they are immediate or delayed. So effect is immediate or delayed, direct or indirect, apparent or not visible. That, for example, change in attitude that do not manifest themselves in overt behavior. So these changes were not to be seen as automatic. However, improvement in educational standards depend not only on well-constructed tests representing the full range of educational objectives, but also a clear articulation and exemplification of the standard desire, sensitive training of markers, and ample opportunity for teachers. So, also scholars mentioned in their view of whether tests could bring about change in teaching and learning, emphasizing the need to consider the level of cognitive skills assessed in tests and likelihood that teachers could successfully train students in high-level operations such as reasoning, problem solving, and critical thinking. Now, question is this: what are dangers of using tests to change practice and standards? Educators mentioned the dangers of using tests to change standards, including threats to validity caused by test preparation practice, which increase or decrease test performance without connection to the construct represented by the test. They rank different types of preparation activities according to on a scale from ethical to highly unethical. An example of ethical practice was motivating students to study by discussing how important test was to them. An example of unethical practice was using materials in classroom that was very similar to the material used in test. Now, question is this: explain Hughes' perspective about Washback. Hughes introduced an important distinction between Washback on the participants in educational system, teachers, learners, administrators, material writers, and so on process, the type of thinking and activities the participants engage in, and on product, for example, amount and quality of learning that results. Now, Messick's case study, he had a case study which was important here about the Washback, and later on we go to Messick's advocated incorporating authenticity and directness in test design, and to minimize construct underrepresentation and construct irrelevant difficulty, which were important from Messick's perspective. Well, then we go to what there are some examples, and the point here is that Washback is not easy to predict or control, and that the shape it assumes is influenced not only by tests but also by the interaction of numerous factors, including characteristics of teachers and students involved, characteristics of educational context, and characteristics of wider social, political, and cultural setting. There are some critical issues and topics about Washback. The first has to do with the difficulty of separating out the influence of tests from the effect of other variables, as there are other variables may affect it. Well, for example, studies have also emphasized the importance of looking at factors beyond the test when attempting to predict what from Washback will take in new sounding. The second issue has to do with the dilemma many teachers face when they are preparing their students for a test that has important consequences. Most teachers in a system with a curriculum that is to be honored and a syllabus that should be taught and achieved. If a test is introduced which is known or believed to sample only some of the syllabus, that the teacher must decide or cover the whole syllabus and whether to teach to the test. The third issue has to do with the responsibility of test developers with regard to the washback of their tests and any impact that extends beyond the classroom into the educational system or even greater society. If a test is having beneficial influence, then there is if the test is having a beneficial influence, then there is no problem. But if teachers or institutes narrow their teaching too drastically, and or if there are other unintended consequences should be placed on the test developers. Well, Messick talks about the consequence of tests that bears on validity. Then we come to current contributions and research, which lots of research conducted about washback, and the types that teachers question is this: what are the types of teachers believe as important mediation of washback? Reliability and fairness of exam, how much the exam violation in their current teaching practice had, the stake and usefulness of the exam, their teaching philosophy, relationship between exam and textbooks, and so on. Well, Washback of tests on learners as seen through eyes of learners too. Another important point is washback has effect on learners too. Washback studies have often been concerned with how test influence teachers, perhaps because of the central role that teachers play in the classroom, but also because of practical difficulties of investigating students' attitudes and behaviors toward washback. Well, there were lots of research methods that were used about washback, and Bailey questions the notion of measuring washback. Since this term is associated with experimental research and identifying, operationally defining, and controlling the variables that will affect the desired measurement, Bailey stresses the difficulty of isolating washback from other variables that may affect teaching and learning. So Bailey stresses the difficulty of isolating washback from other variables that may affect teaching and learning, and the fact that washback must be studied in naturally occurring setting rather than laboratory condition with a non-random sample of subjects. Although some washback outcomes like test result can be measured, other outcomes and most processes can only be analyzed and described. Bailey advises that such analysis should involve methodological triangulation, looking at the situation from various angles, using, for example, more than one data set and more than one type of information or more than one type of method.